I had been with Dominic for over 5 years, and we'd been engaged for 8 months. Our story started at a housewarming party, two people bonding over our mutual dislike for IPAs and shared love for cartoons. Everything seemed perfect. We moved in together after a year, adopted our cat, Beans, and last summer, Dominic proposed during a quiet Saturday morning hike. I said yes immediately, thrilled at the thought of spending my life with him. Planning the wedding was supposed to be fun. I handled most of the preparations while Dominic nodded along. But about 3 months ago, things began to shift. He started making small comments that seemed odd at the time. Hesitations about venues, questions about guest lists, subtle remarks about costs. I brushed them off, thinking it was typical pre-wedding stress. Then came the distant replies to my texts about wedding arrangements. Hours would pass before he responded with, "Looks fine," or "whatever you want." I asked if he was okay, and he insisted it was just work. His construction company had taken on some large projects, so it made sense. As the weeks passed, he started spending more time out with his coworker Paul. Drinks after work, games at Paul's apartment, casual hangouts. Nothing alarming on the surface, but it was more frequent than before. When he returned home, he seemed distracted, always checking his phone, less affectionate. I confided in my best friend Lena, who suggested it might be pre-wedding jitters and recommended a date night. I reserved a table at a cozy Italian restaurant downtown, wore a dress I hadn't worn in months, and even stocked his favorite beer at home. But the night was a disaster. Dominic barely spoke, seemed distracted, and when I tried to discuss our honeymoon plans, he dropped the bomb. He wasn't sure if he was ready, not just for the honeymoon, but for marriage itself. I was stunned. 5 years together, 8 months engaged, and now uncertainty? I pressed him for answers. He mentioned conversations with Paul about marriage changing everything, and brought up Paul's brother's messy divorce. The discussion quickly escalated, and by the time we left the restaurant, tension had filled the car like a physical weight. That night, he slept on the couch. The next morning was painfully awkward. We moved around each other like strangers. He mentioned plans to meet friends at a sports bar, but I was emotionally drained. Hours later, Lena convinced me to leave the apartment. We wandered through Target, sipping coffee, picking up throw pillows. Small things to regain a sense of normalcy. Then came a text from Kylar, one of Dominic's coworkers. He asked if I was okay and mentioned that things had been weird at the bar. I called him immediately. After some hesitation, he revealed that Dominic had made a cruel joke in front of friends, saying, "If you were prettier, I'd marry you." Kylar and others had confronted him, but Dominic brushed it off as a joke. I sat in my car, heartbroken, realizing the man I loved had publicly used my appearance as the punchline for his hesitation. When I returned home, Dominic was passed out on the couch. The apartment smelled of beer. I took Beans to the bedroom and locked the door. The next morning, Dominic tried his usual apology breakfast routine, coffee and bacon. But I couldn't even look at him. I confronted him about what Kylar had told me, and his explanations made things worse. He claimed he was drunk, stressed, and trying to look cool in front of friends. I couldn't stay. I grabbed my things and went to my brother Elliot's apartment, seeking refuge. Dominic texted and called endlessly, pleading to talk, promising to explain. But I responded once. I needed space. I called in sick for work, too exhausted to pretend everything was fine. By Monday morning, Valerie, Dominic's mother, called. She sounded upset, saying Dominic had called her in distress and that there was something important I needed to know. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop. My mind raced. What else could there possibly be? 3 days later, I sat across from Valerie, who looked worn and exhausted. She revealed the truth. Dominic had developed feelings for Maria, a new coworker. Nothing physical had happened, but an emotional connection had formed, creating doubt in Dominic's mind about our engagement. Valerie shared her own experiences with infidelity in her family, explaining she didn't want history to repeat itself. The comment at the bar suddenly made sense, not drunken stupidity, but an attempt to sabotage our relationship subconsciously. I sat there stunned as Valerie explained the timeline. Maria had started work around New Year's. By the company holiday party in March, Dominic was already acting distant, constantly on his phone, spending more time with friends. What I thought was stress was actually emotional turmoil fueled by inappropriate attachments. Valerie's eyes welled as she confessed the painful parallel to her own marriage. I left the coffee shop with a new perspective. This wasn't just about Dominic's fear or Maria. It was about Paul's toxic influence, Dominic's insecurities, and patterns rooted in his family history. I contacted Karina, Dominic's sister, to arrange a neutral family meeting. She agreed immediately. The dinner at Karina's apartment was tense. Valerie, Karina, Paul, Dominic, and I sat awkwardly, shuffling pasta and salad, avoiding the elephant in the room. Valerie finally spoke, demanding clarity. I shared what I'd learned from Maria. Paul tried to defend himself, claiming he was looking out for Dominic. But Karina shut him down. Dominic admitted Maria was innocent. His fear of turning into his father had caused him to act irrationally, escalate doubts, and make a cruel joke. I realized that my engagement was no longer viable. I explained that I deserved certainty, honesty, and respect. Dominic admitted he loved me, but was scared of commitment, scared of repeating his father's mistakes. The conversation went on for hours, full of tears, arguments, and difficult truths. Finally, we agreed. The wedding was off. Our 5-year relationship had reached its end. Separating our lives was surreal. Dominic moved out within a week. Elliot and Lena helped me pack. The apartment felt empty, hollow, a ghost of what it had been. I found a smaller place across town, a cozy 1-bedroom with a tiny balcony. I started to reclaim my life, managing finances alone, growing herbs in dollar store pots, slowly learning independence. Social media added its own layer of stress. Changing my relationship status brought a flood of messages from friends, family, and distant acquaintances. I posted a vague statement about mutual decisions and privacy, muted notifications, and focused on settling into my new life. Dominic and I spoke only about practical matters after that. Mail, shared accounts, returning borrowed items, civil but strained conversations. Maria, thankfully, was unaffected. She had not encouraged any inappropriate connection. Paul, unsurprisingly, tried to minimize the situation, but Dominic's family remained supportive. Valerie and Karina kept in touch, offering reassurance and kindness. Therapy became a vital part of my healing. It helped me process compromises I'd made, red flags I'd ignored, and parts of myself I'd set aside for Dominic. Hiking on Saturday mornings returned, a simple act of reclaiming space and time for myself. Dating felt distant, but I was slowly learning to be comfortable alone. The biggest surprise came with the honeymoon. I had a non-refundable 10-day trip to a coastal cottage booked. Lena suggested I go anyway, alone. At first, the idea terrified me, but the more I considered it, the more liberating it felt. 10 days of self-reflection, exploration, reading, and freedom. I packed books, downloaded podcasts, splurged on a comfortable swimsuit. This solo journey became a symbol of reclaiming my life, my choices, and my happiness. Months after the breakup, Dominic reached out. He shared his therapy journal, reflections on his patterns, his friendship with Paul, and how he treated me. There was no request for forgiveness, no expectation of reconciliation, just self-awareness. And somehow, seeing his growth, I felt a quiet hope, not for us, but for him, and for the possibility that both of us could move forward, healthier and wiser. Through heartbreak, betrayal, and disappointment, I realized a painful truth. Love alone isn't enough. Respect, honesty, trust, and emotional maturity are non-negotiable. I lost a relationship, but I gained self-awareness, resilience, and independence. The engagement I once cherished is gone, but in its place, I've discovered strength I never knew I had. The future is uncertain, but for the first time in years, it feels entirely mine.